Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is U.S. Marine Corps Major Katie Van Dam. She is now a reservist with the Civil Affairs Group at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling near Washington, D.C. She's a veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom as an attack helicopter pilot and also conducted anti-pirate missions near the Horn of Africa during her time on active duty. And Major Van Dam, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So let's start at the beginning. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in San Jose, California. Spent my whole life in the same house until I left for the Naval Academy at 17.
And was there a history of military service in your family?
Both of my grandfathers were drafted. One was drafted into World War II. The other one was drafted into Korea. But I actually come from a longer line of civil servants. My father was a police officer. My grandfather was sheriff. The other grandfather was in the fire department. My aunt was a dispatcher. Plenty of uncles that were in the police department. So civil service is kind of the background of my family.
So definitely a legacy of service.
Yes, yes.
To be sure. You mentioned you left home to go to the Naval Academy.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide to do that?
So 9/11 didn't happen until after, it happened my freshman year, my plebe year at the Naval Academy. And honestly, I was in it for an adventure. Nobody in my family had graduated from 4 years of college before. They had a Division I volleyball team, which was exciting. And I remember leaving thinking, oh, I'm going to go drive a boat. That sounds cool. Why not? So, I mean, the application process was certainly rigorous, so it wasn't quite that serendipitous. But honestly, it just seemed like a great adventure and a great place to start an adventure. It was across the country. And not that my family is amazing. I had their support the whole way, but figured it was a good start to a great adventure, and it turned out I was right.
And so you obviously did very well in high school if you were accepted into the Naval Academy.
Good enough in high school. Questionably good at the Naval Academy, but they still graduated me, so that's got to count.
So you go to the Naval Academy
Mm-hmm.
to embark on this adventure,
Mm-hmm.
and then as you just mentioned, probably just a couple of weeks into your plebe year, your freshman year,
Yeah.
9/11 happens,
Mm-hmm.
and that changes, I'm sure, your vision of what this is going to lead to.
Yes, yeah, definitely. It was less, oh, well, I'll get on a ship and we'll go see the world, to we're going to war. If we stick around on this gig, we're going to war. By that point, I decided instead of the Navy, I really wanted to go into the Marine Corps.
That's it.
Yeah, and even before 9/11 happened, the Marines, the officers and senior enlisted on the Navy side are fabulous at the Naval Academy, but the Marines reminded me of cops. And I say this because it was this grumbling of, oh, we work longer hours, we're underappreciated, underpaid, we have the worst gear, but at the end of every single day, there's this pride in being a Marine. And like I said, I grew up in a family of police officers, and it's very similar, you know, and that just appealed to me, appealed to my soul. And then 9/11 happened, and it really just secured that decision even further. I wanted to go out there and find the people who did this to us. And granted, I had a long time before I got there. I was actually very worried about missing the war. Obviously, that has shown that not many people missed the war, even people who were too young to really remember 9/11 are still fighting this war. But yeah, so 9/11 happened freshman year, and it did. It changed. We were going to war.
Did it change the whole mood of the campus?
Some funny stories with that. We were put on post. You know, everything went to high alert status and Naval Academy. And I remember I was a plebe, so you're definitely at the bottom of the food chain at that part. Standing duty. They didn't give us weapons because at that point the Marines were still guarding the Naval Academy. But I had a bayonet. And I was standing guard with my bayonet. Now, I don't know what I would have done with any terrorists if I would have gotten close enough to do anything with the bayonet. But yeah, it did. It changed the mood. There were some people that wanted to drop out of the Naval Academy and enlist immediately. That was certainly the talk amongst many individuals. Lots of them stuck around to see it through. But yeah, the whole conversation changed. I would argue that it truly changed the course of modern history, you know, and that small microcosm at the Naval Academy was no different.
How would you describe the 4 years at Annapolis in terms of how it changed your perspective, not just on what you were about to do, but the disciplines and the way that it forged your character?
I came from a pretty disciplined household. So the Naval Academy, I wasn't exactly the best student at the Naval Academy. I didn't get in a lot of trouble, but I was so focused on getting myself ready. The end state was go to war, make myself desirable to the Marine Corps, to be selected by the Marine Corps. But it instilled a pride, and you learned a lot. And it's funny because, the code of conduct is something you learned immediately at the Naval Academy. Your plebe summer, it's one of the first things that you have to memorize. And I really believe that simple, it's not very long, that kind of would sum up everything my 4 years at the Naval Academy. It was this real pride in not just being an American, but being surrounded by people who chose to serve this country. And obviously that would continue throughout my career with the phenomenal Marines that I was very, very blessed to lead. So.
A couple quick things. You mentioned that you played Division I volleyball.
I did, yes.
While you were there. I know there's a book, I think, by John Feinstein, and it's I think he's mainly talking about the football teams, but I'm guessing it carries over. He says one of the interesting things about sports at the academies is that at most universities, practice for sports is the hardest thing you do all day. And at the academies, compared to everything else you do, it's probably the easiest thing you do all day. What was it like there?
Yeah, I looked forward to volleyball practice every day. It was physically challenging, but it was definitely a break. Just kind of from the seriousness, and don't get me wrong, we had plenty of fun at the Naval Academy as midshipmen, but I remember thinking every single time we either went to go play a match at somebody else's school, or we were playing a match at home before, we play the national anthem. And I used to almost get teary-eyed when they would play it, because it was just so interesting, because here we are lined up on the back line. Each team lines up on the back line when they play the national anthem, and all the other teams, some of the girls would put their hands over the heart, some of them wouldn't. We would all be standing at attention. And it was just really interesting to think, like, here we are about to play this match, and we're really focused on the match, but every single woman that I'm standing on this line with is going to be on a ship, or they're going to be in Iraq, or they're going to be in Afghanistan sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. And it was different, but it was also fabulous. The bonds and the women that I became good friends with at the Naval Academy, on the volleyball team, it was great.
How quickly did you get the cap off the statue your plebe year?
I couldn't tell you, because I was somewhere in the bottom of that disaster,
Really?
Covered in lard. Oh yeah, I was somewhere on the chain at the bottom of Herndon. So
oh man,
yeah, it smelled really great. It took about a week to get the smell of lard out of my hair. Ugh.
Now at some point after you're a plebe, you get to do the greasing, right?
I was done with lard after that. Absolutely. Somebody else did that. Some other sadistic midshipman did that, not me.
So at what point did you officially get accepted by the Marines and then go on from there?
Yeah, it was service selection was in October of my senior year. And I was selected for Marine ground. And I went to go take the exam, the ASTB, to go Marine Air. I really wanted to go Marine Air. When I left the Naval Academy, when I was a midshipman, and even when we all got our MOSs, our jobs at the end of the basic school, about 6 months after we graduated the Naval Academy, none of the combat arms were open to women, and even human intelligence at the time was closed to women. And for me, I wanted to go into the fight offensively, and I really wanted to fly the Cobra, the attack helicopter. And so I got selected for Marine ground in November, and then took the test, the ASTB. My scores were high enough, and then I got selected for Marine Air. So.
And then after graduation, where'd you go?
I went to Quantico for a lovely 6 months. in the summertime and in the winter. We managed to hit all temperature points in Quantico, Virginia, the snow and the heat. And we spent 6 months there at the basic school. When I left, I thought I'm never coming back to this place again. And then I spent the last 3 years active duty in the Marine Corps being an instructor at the basic school, which was one of the most rewarding experiences in the Marine Corps. But yeah, it was a good experience. You learn basic leadership. The whole idea is to teach leadership through infantry tactics primarily. And they do a great job about that. Also ethics. And then just wanted to get out of there because the sooner I got out of TBS, the sooner I could get done with flight school and the sooner I could be out in the fight. But those soons ended up being years, but I still made it to the fight after all.
So when did you get to start flying?
I headed down to Pensacola in February, but they have quite a long backup sometimes, so I didn't get into a cockpit until I believe it was somewhere around July or August. And then flew T-34s. Nobody flies T-34s anymore, but those are just fixed wing. And then after that, got selected for helos, which I wanted, and flew helos for about 6 months. Got my wings in August 24th, 2007. Big day for me. And then headed to got in my car, packed everything up, and headed to Southern California to start training in the Super Cobra. Every 2 weeks at flight school, they do a winging class, and you put in your preferences, East Coast, West Coast, what your platform preferences are. And I put in Cobras West and did well enough in flight school, did pretty well that I got my first choice. It was a dream come true to hear that come out of my CO's mouth. And like I said, then packed up the car and headed west.
We're talking with Katie Van Dam, Major U.S. Marine Corps. She's now a reservist. We'll be right back to continue her story on Veterans Chronicles. We're back on Veterans Chronicles with U.S. Marine Corps reservist, Major Katie Van Dam. We're talking about her career not only from the U.S. Naval Academy and training, but we're going to get to Operation Enduring Freedom and the anti-pirate missions as well. And Katie, when we left off, you were headed to Camp Pendleton after your time in Pensacola. And tell us what happened there.
I remember my first flight in the Cobra. We went out, we just did simple, we call them boat landings. So you have these large platforms, just really cement slabs on the side of the cliffs along Southern California. And we just practiced how to land the helicopter. Helicopters are pretty simple once you get them going forward, but landing them is normally the most difficult and challenging part. And I remember the sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, and we kept doing these landings where we'd do these big loops and we'd come around and we'd land, but we'd land looking at the ocean because you want to land with, normally the wind comes off the ocean, you want to land with the wind into the nose of your aircraft. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I am flying Cobras looking at a Pacific sunset, because I'd come from California and I always wanted to get back there. I was living the dream. I was truly living my dream, and that first flight really, it was an excitement. You know, it was already exciting that I was going to fly a Cobra, but there I was looking at the Pacific Coast sunset in an attack helicopter at the beginning of my career, and it was very memorable. Obviously, it was a great feeling.
And how long were you there?
I was in Southern California.
Yeah.
I was stationed there from 2007, and I ended up leaving in 2012 with both deployments. First deployment, I actually got attached to HMM 163. It was a 46 squadron at the time, 46, the one with two rotors overhead, and this was before the transition to Ospreys, to the V-22. And attached them out of Miramar, just to the south of Camp Pendleton, but mostly all in the San Diego area. And then my second deployment was out of Camp Pendleton, just north of San Diego, to Afghanistan.
All right, so let's talk about the first deployment.
Okay.
And where did you head?
So my first deployment, I was attached with a small detachment of Cobras, and it was actually the first time the Yankee, the new Huey, was deployed. It's a four-bladed Huey. One of my best friends was on that deployment. And we were on the 13th MEU, on LHD-4, and we left San Diego and made our way via Hawaii and Guam through the Philippines and headed towards the lovely Gulf of Aden off the coast of Somalia to do counter-piracy operations. It was JTF Joint Task Force 151 under Admiral Howard, which was pretty phenomenal to work for her. And we were out at sea for 89 days. I remember that because every 45 days that you're continuously out at sea, you get a beer day. And what happens is everybody comes up on deck and you get 2 beers. That's a very old naval tradition. And I remember 89 days because we were 1 day shy of our second beer day, which they ended up making up for when we pulled into Mombasa, Kenya, and we had more than 2 beers that evening. But it was really interesting. You know, MEUs are essentially the whole point of a MEU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, is to load a lot of Marines on a bunch of Navy ships and have them floating around as a 911 force, waiting to be called. Some MEUs get called to do humanitarian aid after, you know, disaster relief. When we first went into Afghanistan after 9/11, those attack helicopters came off of a MEU. So MEUs, you never know what's going to happen. And so that's why the counter-piracy mission was very interesting. We were also there for the whole Captain Phillips incident. We didn't really directly support that much, but the SEALs were on the ship, and Captain Phillips ended up on our ship. So that was kind of the mood of most of that deployment, was very focused on the counter-piracy. Also some really phenomenal opportunities to work with other nations. We worked with the Danes. We actually had a Chinese helicopter land on our ship, which I think was the first time in U.S. naval history that happened. And that's kind of the cool thing about MEUs, is it's very dynamic. Sometimes it's very boring, especially for some of the Marines that don't get to get off the ship very much. As a pilot, what we would do, every single morning we would get a brief on all of the ships that were in the Gulf of Aden at that time. And we'd fly around and we'd have these little smart packs, and we'd identify the ships. And if we'd listen to distress calls on standard maritime radio frequencies, and sometimes we would be there, and we never shot in anger, but we were certainly there. It was fascinating, at least on the pilot side, to be on that MEU.
So there was more patrolling than simply responding.
It was predominantly patrolling. Sometimes we would respond, and we actually found similar reactions when we were in Afghanistan a few years later, but what would happen is people would hear us coming, and all of a sudden you'd see ladders go over the side of these small ships, or weapons go over the side of the small ships, because they didn't want to get caught with them. But there was one pirate incident. I wasn't on this flight, but where they did catch the pirate, and he actually stood trial in Kenya. A friend of mine actually got flown out. She was a Huey pilot on that deployment. She got flown out to be a testimony, to give testimony as a witness in his, I think it was Kenya or Somalia that he stood trial in.
You mentioned the Captain Phillips incident. We're just about ready to hit a break here. How active were the pirates at that time?
We would hear distress calls pretty regularly, but the thing is the ships were used to this at that point, so they had their own ways to defend as well. They normally didn't go to arms, but they would put their big hoses over the side of the ships to make sure that the pirates couldn't dock on their ships. And like I said, often when we'd show up, all of a sudden nothing was happening. But I don't think they had been quite as radicalized at that point as they certainly became later.
We're speaking with Katie Van Dam, U.S. Marine Corps Major and Reservist. We'll be right back with the rest of her story on Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles on the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined in studio today by U.S. Marine Corps Major Katie Van Dam. She's now a reservist, teaching at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, just outside Washington, D.C. Veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom, as well as anti-pirate missions near the Horn of Africa, and we just heard about that in the previous segment. So, Katie, let's talk about the second deployment, which I'm guessing was to Afghanistan.
Yes.
And when was that, and what was the mission?
So it was in 2011. I spent a lovely warm summer in Helmand Province, southern Afghanistan, and our mission there was primarily close air support. So what that means is we would sometimes do a lot of reconnaissance for the Marines that were in Helmand on the ground. Sometimes we would protect convoys as they were moving north, normally from the south down in Bastion up north to supply the battalions throughout the valley. Sometimes we would fly escort for medevac helicopters. Essentially, we'd be armed bodyguards because with medevac, specifically with dust-offs, the Army medevacs, they didn't have any door guns. So we were their bodyguards to make sure they didn't get shot down. And then a very large amount of our time was close air support. So we would shoot for the Marines or sometimes for other services on the ground, either pre-planned missions or sometimes we call them TICs, troop in contact. So somebody's out on a patrol, they start getting shot at, they're not able to maneuver out of that area, so they would call us.
And then what did that look like when you came in with your?
Yeah, so every single day on the flight schedule, we would have people that were, we flew primarily in sections. So a section is 2 helicopters. Sometimes it was just purely Cobras, sometimes it was purely Hueys, and sometimes we'd have what we called a mixed section. So 1 Cobra, 1 Huey. And sometimes sections were specifically for pre-planned missions, sometimes they were going out for reconnaissance, but we always had 1 section that was set aside as the tick birds. Normally this was a Cobra and a Huey, sometimes it was otherwise, but the real advantage of having a Cobra and a Huey is the Cobra has the Hellfire missiles, right? They're laser guided missiles, and the Huey has a phenomenal ability to actually laze for those missiles. Their sensors were much better than ours were on the Cobra, and they also are utility aircraft. So if we absolutely needed to, we could put them on the ground, throw somebody in the back of the aircraft. Their door gunners, they had more eyes on their aircraft because they had their door gunners as well. And so it was a great team, the Cobra and the Huey. So anyway, we would have 1 section set aside as the tick birds. What we would do is we would get the brief, and then we would go out and we would relieve the other people that are on the opposite 12-hour cycle from us. And we would put everything in the aircraft. We would put our gear inside the cockpit, we would put our weapons inside the windows, we carried an M4 in our windows, and then we had an M9 across, just a small handgun strapped to our vest. And we would put all the gear in there, everything was standing by, and what we would do is we'd always be around. So we'd be sitting in the ready room and the tick horn would go off. This started out as various hairband songs from the 80s initially, and we ended up into an old school, sounded like something out of World War II siren by the end of the deployment. But regardless, the tick horn would go off, and what would happen is 1 pilot, for the Cobra side, 1 pilot would go out, throw on their gear, start the aircraft. The other pilot would go to whoever was essentially standing duty, we called the SDO, but whoever was standing duty, and see if we could get any information from them immediately. If they didn't have the information, the other pilot would run out and also put on all their gear. At this point, there were a group of Marines that were specifically dedicated to getting that aircraft ready to go, taking everything off the tail, because we'd normally strap down the tail rotor, and they would be starting up the aircraft. And it was beautiful is the only word that comes to mind, but the teamwork and the pure focus on the mission was something I've never experienced since. And these were Marines, some of them were the ordnance specialists, some of them were, we'd always have airframers, which were my Marines. We'd have them out there in case there's like an issue with the hydraulic system, whatever it was. And immediately that bird would be off the deck as fast as possible. Both the birds would be out, and you would go straight to the tick, wherever the Marines were that needed you. Now, sometimes it wasn't necessarily a kinetic situation. Sometimes the Marines found an IED emplacer, and these guys were emplacing IEDs that, and so we would get there as soon as possible, but we'd keep outside of normally about a 5-kilometer range was where like they couldn't hear us. And we'd stay out there, we'd get eyes on. The Huey ideally would get eyes on because their laser was amazing. And we'd figure it out. We'd get what we called PID, positive identification, make sure there were no civilians in the area so we didn't have any civcas, civilian casualty issues. And then we would hit them with a Hellfire from 5 kilometers away for the IED emplacers. or we'd show up on station as we're getting there. We'd be talking to various agencies to get us to the Marines who are actually on the ground. Sometimes when we would show up on station, the fighting would stop because these guys knew that we meant business, right? We came, the Huey had a minigun, which was a 7.62. They had a 50 cal on the side. Both of us showed up with rockets. So 2.75 inch rockets are about this big. They're about this round. And then we would show up with the Hellfires, and then we had 20 millimeter bullets, which probably about pretty, they make big holes. So nobody really wanted to stick around. Now, sometimes they did stick around, and oftentimes we did engage in these fights. So when you're in that situation, everybody asks like, oh, is there this crazy bloodlust? Is there something like that? And honestly, it's trying to figure things out. You got to figure out where the good guys are. You got to figure out where the civilians are. You got to figure out where the bad guys are. Make sure there are no civilians. I remember one time we showed up, and this guy, we had PID on him, right? We had positive identification of him, and he walks into this it was a wheat field. We're like, okay, we're just going to wait for him to come out the other side. He comes out the other side holding a kid's hand. Can't do anything at that point, right? So you have to, it's this heightened awareness. And when for Hellfire, it's a button. When you hit that button or you pull the trigger, there is an amount of like sheer and utter terror. Like, dear God, please don't let me have missed anything. You're also like very sure, and you get confident the more you get there, but I don't know that it was ever 100% like, yeah, this is coming at you, buddy. That was after, we're all big talk after the firefight. But at the time, it's like, okay, I think I got this down. Please, please do not let me have missed something.
So the focus is just flushing everything else out.
It is, but it's a constant, you're listening to the guys on the radio, you're still taking everything in. Where's my Dash 2 aircraft? Or maybe I'm the Dash 2 aircraft. Maybe I'm the wingman. Where's my lead? Where's my lead shooting at? What am I shooting at? So you have to figure everything out while still coordinating with the other aircraft so that you're not being redundant with your fires, or if there are multiple threats, that you're covering all of those threats. But yeah, it's a rush after. A rush seems like what you have for action sports, so I don't know that it's necessarily a rush. It's just you have a mission, you're focused, and I don't know, you don't really think about much
the
else.
Adrenaline starts to
it's somewhere in there, but I don't know that you even notice it because you're just, I don't know, not a doctor, so I'm sure there's a better way to describe this.
Did the enemy at any point ever have any sort of coordinated air defenses that concerned you?
After Libya, so Arab Spring happened while we were there, there were some SA-24s that came out of Libya that we were worried that were going to come down in Helmand. But at the time while we were there, they didn't make their way down there. It's a man pad, so it's a very advanced one too. Supposedly there were SA-7s in the area. I don't know that. Also another man pad, very old, and the CIA had done a pretty good job of buying those back at the beginning of the war. Sometimes we saw AAA anti-air artillery, but actually often we would see the AAA on the back of a truck, and usually that was actually local militias. So sometimes we got shot at. RPGs were really the biggest threat to us. Our tactics were such that we stayed out of the max effective range of your basic RPG, unless we were going in to shoot. And we had one very extremely dynamic situation one time. And the interesting thing about RPGs is normally you recognize that you were shot by at an RPG when it lands on the other side. So it's not really something, we don't have anything inside the aircraft that reliably tells us that we're being shot at by an RPG. So it happened. I've seen it on tape. I saw myself get shot back at the squadron after the fact, but no, not really. Helicopters in Afghanistan, where we were predominantly vulnerable when they're coming in and out of landing zones. That's why our job was so important when we were running the escort for the medevac missions.
Any harrowing mechanical issues?
There were some interesting situations sometimes. I mean, these are machines, and you really have to respect them. I had an emergency landing one time at night. And we were supporting these poor guys. we were in Task Force Helmand, so TFH. This is where the Brits were, and it was very simple. These Merlins, which are these big aircraft that carry a lot of people, were coming in to pick up these, well, I won't use the word that comes to mind, but these poor individuals who were just going home, right? They needed a ride back to Bastion, and then from there they were headed home. And we were overhead providing very basic escort. The Merlin was going in and out of a FOB, right, a small base. So this is super routine. And then all of a sudden my aircraft starts kicking. And then my wingman says, hey, you kind of look like a light show over there. What's going on? And what was happening was our engine was failing on us. Now, thankfully the Cobra has 2 engines, but we had to kick the Merlins out, tell everybody to get out of the very small LZ inside the FOB. And essentially our engine was eating itself and it was on fire. I did the maneuvers how we were supposed to, got on the ground. I hopped out of the front because my co-pilot was in the back, hopped out, told him, looked out and I couldn't see my hand in front of me. The whole LZ was full of smoke. And then just walked in and trying to talk to him, pulled the halon tube, the fire went out in the engine and we were fine, we landed. I lost one of my best friends a year and a half before in a midair. And I remember as I'm recognizing that my helicopter's failing on me, there was this moment of, oh, Seth, do me a good one, like help me out. And then that was it. You don't really think, especially, it's even less complicated than it is in a firefight because you're like, I can be a black hole in the ground here, or I can figure this out. And the good thing about how we train pilots, at least in the Navy and the Marine Corps, and I'm sure it's the same in the other services, you have these emergency procedures that you have to memorize, and you're constantly being grilled on them as a young pilot. And when you're an instructor, you're constantly grilling your young pilots, and there's always more studying that goes into anything when you're an instructor. So you just don't think. Your hands do what they're supposed to do. You do your S-turns, get down to the landing zone, and we were very blessed. We ended up on the ground that day. My Marines were great. They're like, man, we don't know what happened with that engine. It checked out well. I'm like, guys, I had 20%, on this engine, which is great. That engine kept kicking all the way down, even though I didn't have much on her. But yeah, it was, we got it on safe on, nothing heroic, nothing crazy, just did what you're supposed to do. And I was very blessed to have pilots before me that were really, really tough and grilled me on emergency procedures constantly. And so when the time came, I executed and everything was fine.
You talked about, I guess, rules of engagement a little while ago with the man in the wheat field coming out with the child. As you probably know, there's been some frustration expressed about too restrictive rules of engagement. I'm not talking about that specific situation maybe, but did that ever get frustrating for you?
No, actually. So 2011, summer of 2011 was a very kinetic summer in Afghanistan, which was an attack helicopter pilot was what we were looking for, kind of looking for the fight. We had a great JAG at the beginning. I couldn't honestly tell you who he worked for. I think he worked for the MEF, but who sat down the whole squadron and was like, here's the deal. Here's what's good. Here's what's not good. Here's what's going to get you in trouble. Here's what's not. This is what I'm going to stand by you for. And I never once, and this is my experience of 2011, so, rules, ROE changes constantly in theater, but I never once felt that I couldn't take a shot that I wanted to take. And we shot a lot that summer, but everybody was on the same page, and I shot for Aussies, I shot for Brits, shot for the Georgians. They did a lot of good work up there as well, and I never felt constrained by ROE.
Any challenges being a female pilot?
So this question's obviously come up a lot recently with the integration debate. There are always going to be people, and I think that any minority experiences this, regardless of where you are. There are going to be people that don't think that you can be there, or I did feel the need to prove myself more than I think maybe some of my peers did. But combat's the great equalizer. You can be the stud of the squadron and you get into a combat situation, and if you choke, okay, you can be somebody who maybe people aren't sure about, and you step up to the plate and you do well. It was interesting because it's why I'm a huge believer in the full integration of combat arms and everything, because at the end of the day, nobody cared, whatever their feelings were. Nobody really cared as long as I was competent as either their lead or as their wingman. And so yeah, I would say throughout my career there are certainly challenges with people with biases, but it never inhibited me do my job. I also might be one stubborn SOB as well, so I wanted to get there and do what I joined to do, and I did, and I was surrounded by phenomenal Marines. I never had an issue leading my Marines as a woman, never had anybody question anything. Worked with 65 of some of the most gifted human beings and most patriotic human beings I've ever met as far as the Marines I led. And my peers, for the most part, I didn't have any issues.
Last topic, and you already answered this perhaps a little bit, and you are still serving your country as a reservist, but when you look back at your active duty career and even perhaps your time as a reservist, what are you most proud of when it comes to your service?
Oh, that's a tough question. I didn't think that one out before. Leading Marines was the most rewarding thing. Going to combat was amazing. It was everything that I hoped for. It's a very Spartan lifestyle, very simple. Very, very proud to have served alongside some amazing men and women. But leading my Marines and then having the opportunity, 3 years later, to lead a group of 38 young lieutenants at the basic school for 6 months. I have my platoon, and I'm just so excited to see what these young, hungry, patriotic Americans are going to do, because there's a lot of discussion on, pick your political line, on how the America is maybe at a low point, or we need to make it great again, or pick whatever it is. And no politics here, but I don't know, the Marines that I led and the young lieutenants that are now out there that are leading, that I had the great opportunity to lead at the basic school and kind of teach in their initial phase. I don't know what people are worried about, because this country's in good hands as long as, they're part of it either in uniform or out.
Katie, thank you for your service, and thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Katie Van Dam, U.S. Marine Corps Major, now a reservist, and she is an instructor at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, just outside Washington, D.C., veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom and of anti-pirate missions near the Horn of Africa. I'm Greg Corumbus. This is Veterans Chronicles.